All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeremy Clark. I'm at Concordia University. I'm a member and I'm on the computer science, more technical side, so we maybe haven't interacted as much. But I'm glad that I was finally able to draw another computer scientist engineer into the room. So it's my pleasure to introduce Aleksander Essex. He's a professor at Western in engineering, electrical and computer engineering. I was there when Alex started working on voting, which was 20 years ago. And he's become the foremost technical expert in academia on voting technology in Canada and one of the top ones in the world as well. And so you're going to really enjoy his talk anyway. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, that was a very social scientist way to introduce me with my credentials and stuff. But as a computer scientist, I'm just Alex. And I want to thank, we don't, you're not supposed to wear suits to the conference in the computer science world. I recognize that we have a bit of an interdisciplinary audience here. And that's exactly what I love about voting. It's what drew me into it. And like Jeremy says, we've been working sort of in this field for this is our 20th year. So Jeremy works more on the blockchain side of things today, but we kind of maintain a foot in both worlds because this stuff is important. So yes, I'm from Ontario, don't hold it against me. And this right now is a bit of an Ontario problem. It's a bit of a Nova Scotia problem, and it is a once and future Quebec problem as well. So it's something really, at this point, it's a Canada problem. It's something we got to talk about. And when I say problem, I want to explain what I mean by that, because it's kind of complicated. Okay, so internet voting. Like, what is internet voting? I think we can kind of have a sense of it. I don't know if anyone here has actually voted in a democratic election using an online system. Anyone here? So London, Ontario does not use internet voting. They use optical scan tabulators. You mark a ballot and whoosh, it goes into the machine and it gets read. Internet voting is its own thing, and it's kind of what you would want it to be if you like. I think everybody wants to vote online. But in Ontario, we do have online voting going on at the municipal level. And it looks like this. And it looks like this. The municipalities, they have a voters list. And so they mail everybody an envelope. And they mail it to your house. So you have to have a house or an apartment or something to receive this information, which is, its own problem. In fact, up until I think, so Ontario's running a municipal election this year. The previous election cycle 4 years ago in 2022, we used the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation to build the voters list. So like landlords and tenants, that's how you're building voting lists. Problematic for various reasons. Fortunately, Elections Ontario stepped in and now they're managing it now, but you get an envelope sent to your house. The envelope contains login credentials, a PIN, and then what's not in the PIN is a date of birth that you use to log into the system. So you flip open your iPad or whatever, you type in your PIN, you type in your date of birth, you go to the website, obviously, that it says. There's a whole bunch of stuff with that as well. There's a lot of stuff, but I'm trying to keep it high level. When you cast your vote, it's not like with Elections Canada, where you go to a gym or a church or something, and then it goes into a cardboard box. That sucker goes out onto the internet. And depending on where you are, and depending on who's handling the information that you're sending, it could go on quite a journey. Certainly not just a journey through your local town, but so for example, we did a paper once about the cloud infrastructure for Northwest Territories, and their absentee voters that were voting at a Yellowknife were sort of bouncing around the country, right, to Toronto. It's run by a company that is based here in Montreal, so it's crossing a lot of jurisdictions. Generally, it's supposed to stay within Canada, but if you are outside of Canada and you're voting, you get routed through all kinds of different countries, and we've done some work about that as well. I think the important thing to note here is that when we talk about cloud infrastructure, I think you guys all know this term cloud infrastructure. What does cloud mean? Cloud means somebody else's computer. Okay, that's important. So when you send your vote over the internet, assuming that everything's fine, it goes and it hits a server, and the server is run by a company. Now, this is also an important point. I had a very interesting chat one time with an intelligence agency. I won't say which one, but you can guess. The one that handles this kind of stuff. And they were imagining City Hall at the various municipalities as running these elections. But it's like, no, there's that word again, cloud. You have a private company running it. Now, nothing wrong with industry, okay, but their incentives and the things that are important to a company running an election are not always 100% aligned with the democratic goals of the election itself. Okay. This is also important. Okay, so if you think I don't know, has anyone actually been an election poll worker? Anyone worked a poll? Thank you for your service. This is a good thing. No, it's actually, like, I actually find it just a lot of fun. It's so boring, but like, if there was an amazing kind of boring, it's amazing. You're just sitting there with your green tea going like, oh, it's so great. And nobody's yet, like my colleagues in the US, they tell me stories at the polls, like the Americans have a lot of anger. But everything, in my experience, observing and actually working elections, very, very peaceful. So you think about an Elections Canada election, at the end of the night, all the ballots go onto the table, the scrutineers watch, the DRO counts, the poll worker also observes, both people documented. Here, it's all done inside of this thing here. So the city is actually not involved. The city logs into a web page and the system tells you who won. So then the city takes that information, oftentimes they manually transcribe it into something and then they bring it into Microsoft Excel. A bunch of stuff happens and then eventually it gets sent on to the media to report on the results. Okay, but here's the problem. This is your vote. This is the outcome. And then here's what you see. Okay. Now, it turns out, apparently, most of the Ontario voters don't seem to care. They don't seem to think that this is an issue. And again, I'm a computer scientist, but I do work with social scientists, and we do speculate that the reason for this is actually a good reason, which is that we enjoy relatively high trust in institutions in Canada. Fantastic. I think that's a good thing. But it is possible to trust something so much that maybe that's not good as well. So I think the central question I want to ask is, would you trust an election that you couldn't observe? I think this is an important question because in the paper elections, you can watch the counting. When I say you, I mean at least a representative of the candidate's campaign. And if you've worked, you've seen that. Sorry, were you a scrutineer or a poll worker?
J'étais scrutateur.
Okay.
I don't know what is the word in.
So, did you work for a party like?
No, for the super.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's good, yeah. So the thing that's different here that I think people need to understand, I don't want to use the term wake up to, because I don't want to sound like a YouTube video here, but I would like there to be greater awareness. Certainly in my travels talking to election officials, I think they understand this, but they don't have a solution for it, and nobody's really bothering them about this. But we're talking about something akin to counting up ballots behind a digital closed door. So the question, would you trust this, is actually the wrong question, because for millions of people in Canada, in Ontario and Nova Scotia in particular, and almost in Quebec, the answer is yeah, you do, because you already are using it. Okay, so maybe a better question is actually, should you trust this? And so to that question, this is an easier question to answer because here are various quotes. You don't have to read them, but I just wanted to sort of like I sat down and I tried to, because this kind of comes up in conversation sometimes, like, oh, but you know, is it really a big deal? And I'm like, well, you know, some of this stuff, like the UN Office on Human Rights, General Comment 25, there should be independent scrutiny of the vote counting process. Incredibly, sometimes in my journeys around Canada, talking on CBC, talking to clerks, talking to chief electoral officers, talking to councils, they get it in their mind that either this is an Alex idea, or maybe it's some kind of political thing from the right or something like that. No, this is a democratic idea, okay? It existed before I came along, and, you know, God willing, it'll still be around after I'm gone. And that is the spirit in which we're contending here with this research, okay? We are not questioning the outcomes of elections, actual elections. I want to make that clear. That is a different activity, okay? I think you might have read about that in the news, especially around the COVID times. You might have recalled there being an incident in the United States on that topic. This is about process, right? About due process. And I think the important thing to recognize here is that elections require transparency, independent observation, auditability, so on and so forth. We know what that looks like for paper ballots. We've been doing it over 100 years. Okay, that is well established. And guess what? All of our laws are built around paper ballots. The problem comes when we changed the technology to something else that's fundamentally different than counting ballots at the local community center. That's where the problem is. The laws don't match the technology. They really don't match the technology. And it's been my experience that a lot of people that write the laws, God bless them, they don't understand how the technology works. There's certain legislators that, you know, and then of course you come in and you say, like, excuse me, I'd like to tell you about how the internet works, and you know, you're the bad guy somehow. So it's fascinating. We were talking about this at lunch. There's a lot more there that I will try not to comment on. So in the social science world, one of the things we're talking about is trust, right? So social scientists love to measure trust, and trust is necessary. But it is, you know, it's a subjective thing. It's like a feeling, it's an opinion, it's a perception. Okay, so yes, we would like to have elections be trusted, and no, we would like them to not be distrusted. But, you know, if you go to, so we were also talking about this at lunch. I gave a talk at CPSA last year, which is a social science conference, and that was really interesting for me to, you know, because computer science is very different. And so, and you know, we were talking about trust a lot, and I was like, whoa, trust, very important. But guess what? We also are interested in trustworthiness. So not just how does the voter feel about it, but how worthy is it of that trust? So you can also imagine a situation, and we can make this chart like as many dimensions as we want, but for this talk, I'll keep it 2 dimensions. Trusted or untrusted, trustworthy or untrustworthy. But trustworthy versus untrustworthy, I mean, is it showing its homework? Do you, the losing candidate that just knocked on 1,000 doors and talked to 10,000 people and then lost unexpectedly, do you feel like the election was something you can accept and your supporters? Okay. That's a social science question, but I mean, on the technical side, we can talk about whether it's emitting this information, this evidence or not. So I think we all agree, you know, people trust it and it's trustworthy. This is the sweet spot we would like to be in. You can also have a system that's reasonably trustworthy, like it actually does admit evidence, but a bunch of people, for partisan political reasons, let's say, decide they aren't going to trust the outcome anyway. We have seen this. This is not great. It's actually pretty bad. You could also have a situation where it's untrustworthy, but people know that it's untrustworthy. right? They know that the election, so you might think in certain authoritarian regimes, nobody kind of believes that, or like they know kind of like the game. The elections are a bit of a performance. That is not great either. But I would argue one of the worst possible places to be in is where people believe it and there's no cause to believe it. And I would argue that at least in Ontario and Nova Scotia, we're kind of like in this bubble. Now, I'm not saying that I have ever seen any evidence that an election was wrong. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying that I think that anyone involved in elections has ever done anything, well, super wrong, let's say. But if you work with real election officials, you know that like things happen, the kind of stuff kind of gets like swept under. None of that adds up to fraud or like elections kind of not being, I want to make that clear, but elections are messy. What we are focused on is providing some kind of assurance, some kind of evidence, some kind of something that does not involve blind faith, just trust. In the computer science world, trust means a kind of like a faith, a belief that something will happen or not happen. And so it's not a perception. So we talk about a trusted entity. We are saying we assume that entity will act in good faith, that they will do the right thing. And in computer science, trusted entities are why cybersecurity exists, because like, who do you trust? I mean, how do you trust a third party with some of the stuff? So a lot of our research is how to take those trusted parties out of the mix and replace them with some kind of, where you spread the trust around. So any one party that decides to act in an evil manner can't take over. So one of the questions that I think is useful to discuss here is what is happening in online voting in Canada? What's the landscape look like? So just kind of at a high level, maybe just start off. I realize this kind of the screen's a little small, so I'll just try to highlight these. In Ontario, we have this like two-tier municipal. It's actually technically three different types of municipalities: upper tier, lower tier, and single tier. So London, Ontario, where I'm from, that's a single tier. And then, in the small towns, the regions, I wonder if Quebec has something similar. You have small towns, there are sort of lower tier municipalities like counties and so forth. And then you'll have a regional municipality that kind of the mayors of all the little small towns have a kind of like a super council in the regional municipalities. But broadly speaking, we've got 444 of these entities in Ontario, sorry. And then about half of them used online voting last cycle. And so in October, we're going to go through it again. This is going to be, if you look at the growth, it's been kind of like exponential. Like it'll turn into what you call a logistic function. So it's going to start tapering off. But we've been in the exponential growth phase of online voting adoption in Ontario for some years now. I think what's unique about the Ontario case, I don't know of any other jurisdiction in the world that does this. And if you know of a jurisdiction, I'd like to hear about it from you, is as far as we know, Ontario municipalities are the only ones that have eliminated paper ballots entirely. You can only vote online or by the telephone. If you want to vote for, whatever, like, who's the mayor of Toronto? If you want to vote for Olivia Chow, press 1. If you want to vote for whatever the other candidate. There's obviously all kinds of usability issues there, and I've heard all kinds of stories from kids. So telephone voting it's like so bad we don't even study it. Like it's just everyone knows that it's like just not good. But let's focus on internet voting because it has sort of like the most cyber risk properties. But you're looking at almost like 2 million voters in Ontario that have this sort of feature where they have to, whatever the cyber risk is or isn't, it's linked to their democratic franchise, right? So there was a case in Lambton Shores, up by where Jeremy and I originate from, where some locals challenged that the election was, kind of being done in some way that was safe. They were worried about their ballot secrecy. I actually was an expert witness in this case, and they said they didn't vote because they didn't trust the system to preserve the secrecy of their vote, right? Now, ballot secrecy, I don't need to explain this to you guys. You know what that is. I mean, it's like right there in the Canada Elections Act, the vote is secret. That's like a no-brainer. It's understood. We don't have to give some normative recounting of it. It's part of the law, ballot secrecy, even at the municipal level. So they were worried about the guarantees around that. And by the way, the vendor knows how you voted, right? This is one of these interesting features of online voting that is not similar to paper ballots. There is a database on that server, and that might not be true for, come on in. That might not be true for every vendor. We are limited in what we can see. The vendors, interestingly, do not like us to look at what they do. I mean, they're running public elections with this technology, but they're very hesitant to allow us to even look at it. But from what we can infer from public observation, the information about your identity, or at least information that's sufficient enough to re-identify you, to uniquely re-identify you, is contained in the same web session as the ballot selection you make. So that information touches their server. Now, what they do with it is a separate question. A lot of them promise, oh, we don't look, right? But I just, it's important to understand that the technical reality is that, at least from what we can tell, there is the capability there for the vendor to associate your identity with your vote. Okay, so that's what I told the lawyers in the Lambton Shores case. The judge threw it out and said that no, in fact, the voters had voluntarily disenfranchised themselves by choosing not to vote because of privacy concerns. Anyway, so I'm not a lawyer. I never understood that legal decision, but people that do understand things like that, they explained it was just, with legal cases, they can only consider the narrow scope of what was being looked at in the case, and this kind of fell outside of it. But these are relevant questions because this strikes to the heart. If Elections Quebec decides to adopt online voting for municipalities, this is going to directly affect you guys too, right? So,
Are these vendors ever subjected to some audit that's independent?
Well, so the short answer is not really. You have to understand, okay, so there's two different ways that this happens. So the Ontario way is, Dougie says, internet voting, what, I don't, I'm too busy trying to ban liquor or get liquor into things or take liquor away or, it's all roads lead to, but so your municipal affairs and housing in Ontario is very much hands-off. The Municipal Elections Act says the cities make their decisions about voting, and how to vote. So they do all their own procurement. They set all their own RFPs, and they hire or don't hire their own people to review it. And in many cases, many of the smaller cities work with vendors only, and the vendors tell them what security there is. Elections Quebec had a different approach. I don't know why the provincial powers are so different, but the view here seems to be, no, you will only use online voting if we approve it, and you will use the vendor that we approve. And so there was going to be a pilot study, and then they announced rather abruptly that they were pulling the plug. Now, I've talked to both sides of this story, and I've got different impressions about what happened. All I'm going to say is I think there was more there than what hit the press. But you can rest assured it'll be back at some point. I don't know when, but it's never the desire to vote online. It's natural, right? It would be so much easier. Cambridge, Ontario, in trying to say, Cambridge, Ontario, it's always Cambridge. They had this thing where they're trying to sell people on the idea of online voting. So they ran a campaign called #VoteNaked. So they had one of the council candidates, and he was naked with his laptop at the bus stop, going yeah, because if you're voting online, you can vote from the comfort of your own home, and #VoteNaked. Why not? Sure, but I want to think about some of these properties. We have seen real world incidents. I'm going to talk later about that. We've seen unpatched vulnerabilities. found this, like, there's a lot of our research is like finding like things that, like, I think they should have thought of these things, but I guess they didn't. I mean, it's great for us because we get to publish papers about it and we win awards for it, but like, and we get, you know, I'm on CBC all the time talking about it, but I don't think it's great for the voters of Ontario and Nova Scotia to have all this stuff, but there's a big issue with these unused credentials, these envelopes that get mailed to you. We just presented a study finding, I'm gonna sort of like detail this a little more, but you know, finding like in Nova Scotia, like a server chock full of CVEs, they're like vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, like known software vulnerabilities. Now, amid all of this, we did try to do something, I think, to try to help things, in which was my colleague at Brock, Nicole Goodman, and I initiated a national standard for municipal online voting. And we've been working with them for the last, I don't know, several years. And it was published in 2024. The first review of the standard is actually next week. So it's something, it's better than nothing, which was cities kind of relying on vendors to tell them what was important about security. This is now an independent document that says, okay, look, you know, if you're gonna do online voting, you should have a bunch of things. This document is a beginning. It is deficient, and missing the other stuff, but you know, we're farther ahead than we were. Okay, so you know, average turnout is pretty low. That turns out to be a problem when you're mailing everybody a credential and then they're throwing it out, like, you know, so hold on to that. But and in computer science, in computer science, we call it a black box, like chromatically speaking. But you know, let's call it behind the curtain problem. You don't get evidence that your vote was counted, right? Like you can get a song and dance from the server saying, oh yes, it's, you know, oh, it's very, thank you for voting, all this sort of stuff. But in terms of like independently scrutinizable evidence, you're taking it on faith. As we always joke, you know, like faith is more of like a Saturday, Sunday kind of thing, not like a Thursday night kind of thing. So independent audits, there's no way to independently audit, and all the laws are structured around recounts of paper ballots, right? And think about it, when you have a tight race with a hand counted ballot, it's possible that if the DRO is a little bit kind of out of it, you know, it's a long day, 12 hours, right? They might have, you know, missed a couple, right? That's a human error problem. And so recounts and laws about vote margins being tight, needing to be recounted, makes total sense for paper ballots, hand counted. But here, we're using electronic counting where it could be systematically wrong. The entire system itself could be wrong, like the configuration could be wrong. And you know, we published papers where we demonstrated the ability to like entirely flip the votes. So whatever the like votes are, you can just like, if the vulnerability was exploited, completely flip it, right? So that's not a margin of error issue. So the mental model is wrong, the laws are wrong for the technology. There has to be a way to independently audit this stuff. And the way that they do it is they say, oh, well, we have a way to do a recount of an internet voting system. So the way that they do a recount, okay, in paper ballot land is to get different people on a different day with a judge to come and actually do it a second time. In the internet voting world, they take the original data file and run it through the original software and magically get back the same answer, okay? Assuming that the original data is correct and the program is correct. But importantly, you know, members of the public do not see that data. They do not see that program. And they don't know if the data that is being presented is even correct or not. Again, we don't have a reason to say that it's wrong. We're just saying, where's the evidence? You know, like, is this like Giga Chad, trust me, bro? Or is this, you know, a democratic election? Okay. So scrutineering is not meaningful in the way it is for paper ballots. I think this should be obvious, but for some reason in the voting world, it's kind of like a blind spot. So what kinds of things are we interested in an online voting case? Well, you know, if I want to kind of make it a little bit non-technical, we do actually have to worry about voter authentication more in the online space than we do in person, right? If you're in person, you have to present yourself as a human being. You are like exposing your entity to being noticed. If you go vote all around town, that leaves some kind of like forensic trail that old-fashioned investigation can uncover. It's also hard to go and vote at a whole bunch of different polling places and claim that, you know, you're somebody that you're not, because you have to get the ID for that. But in the online setting, it's typically done remotely. I mean, sometimes they'll set up like little voting kiosks at the mall and you can come in and vote on their laptop. I think Wasaga Beach actually does a drive-through voting, which I heard about that in 2022. So, you know, you just like, you roll up, you're like, I'd like to cast a vote for, you know, Carol, and then I'll take 26 of the rum, you know, so we get down to the beach after. Okay, fine. So, but this is a bigger problem in the internet voting system. If you don't have strong authentication, like it's opening you up to like really large scale attacks, nation state type stuff. I mean, the nation states, this is just, if you're a nation state and you're watching this, you're going like, oh, this is great. What can we do with this? I was talking to a colleague recently, and they were saying, well, you wrote in your report that it would require a national identity card, like a digital identity card. And I'm like, yeah, that's like a minimum. If you want to do internet voting properly, at a minimum, you need a national digital identity card. And then she was like, but I thought you were against that. And I'm like, well, I mean, I think there's pros and cons. But it's not about what I want. It's like, if you want to do internet voting, you're going to need a national digital identity card. And if you don't want a national digital identity card because it's unpopular politically, then, you know, how are you going to solve your digital identity problem? Because think about it. If I have a online voting credential, there's nothing that ties the piece of paper to me. So, you know, I had candidates from, so council candidates tell me about, like, there's, you know, in their small towns. I actually talked to the mayor of your hometown one time about this, and he was describing cases where people, they're like, oh, you know, Harold, I don't know what to vote. I don't know who to vote for. You know, just take my envelope. I don't need it. So the system doesn't know who you are. The system sees the code and the date of birth that were entered are correct. So who you are in the system is your identity, but who you are in reality is your entity. And those things are not strongly linked to each other, right? If you had a digital identity card, you could get a stronger link. It's not perfect, but it would be a little easier. It's not as casually transferable to give your passport to some neighbor down the street. Actually, happen to have mine here because of my digital identity problem yesterday. I tried to get on the plane with an expired driver's license. Whoops. Okay, you also have to have some understanding about what's going into the election system. We have problems with the client's device. We have problems or like vulnerabilities or things to consider on the network, right? We just keep writing papers about this kind of stuff because the internet is a dangerous place from an information, you know, validity standpoint. Service outages. We keep having the election go down on election night because it turns out everyone's trying to log in on election night. Like, who could have predicted that, right? And it's not even an Ontario problem. I had to testify once at New South Wales legislature, kind of to just make the point, like, okay, New South Wales, you had your service go down on election night. We also have that. This is a systematic problem. And so special care needs to be taken to not allow that to happen. I mean, like thorough testing and bandwidth and backups, like incident response plans, right? When this happened in Ontario, and I'll jump ahead, there's this one photo of this one municipal clerk. I won't say which town, but man, that gentleman was like, he just had 1,000-yard like gaze when CBC was interviewing him about the service outage. And yeah, I felt bad for them because you know, the clerks, they do good work. But you know, this was really a huge upset for them when it went down, and that was 2018. that happened. It was like, you know, all the cities that were using that vendor, like, you couldn't vote on election day. They had to extend the voting period. And they had to invoke emergency powers to do it, so. Okay, so a lot of the conversation, a lot of what I've been talking about is, it's kind of talking about like features, or like what kind of encryption do we need, what kind of like, you know, audits do we need, what, you know, you know, how many bits of security do we need? When you engage with the election world on this topic, that tends to be the case. Well, what's like another, you know, maybe what penetration testing firm should we use, or, you know, but at the end of the day, this is the wrong question. Okay, it's not about what should the system do and provide. The starting point, the foundation is what should the election do? And if you're listening to these conversations, if you go to these councils, they're really over here. And this is where we want to be. This is the first principles. You know, if you're doing an engineering design, you start off with like, what does the thing have to do? It has to deliver an outcome. The outcome has to be right. And there should be a way to prove that to people, especially the losing candidates. So, you know, this is what we need to kind of get the thinking towards. Let me tell you about a couple of papers that we wrote. So we wrote one this was published last year, Best Paper Award, eVote ID. And so we did a bunch of stuff involving, we called it a dumpster attack. So we went for every city and we figured out which cities are doing the pure online voting. And by the way, the province doesn't track this information. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario kind of does, but we do our own vendor census essentially. So we figured out who's using this, and then we did a study where we looked at all of the victory margins and you know, in the context of like turnout and so forth, and we developed a risk metric. Okay, so if you live in a city, so just think about this. Imagine you live in a city that only allows you to vote online, that mails every voter, every eligible voter, without their input or anything, mails them a PIN in an envelope that is the credential to log into that system to cast a vote. And then like, let's say 25 to 35% of the people actually vote, meaning like 65 to 75% of these envelopes go in the garbage, or at least they go somewhere. Maybe some of them get shredded, but our research and our structured interviews with clerks have suggested that this has been observed, that these envelopes just like go into like the community mail like trash bin. Right? I think we know people don't vote in municipal elections in large enough numbers relative to the victory margins that this could be a real problem. So the question we had was, how hard would it be for your town, right? If I wanted to, I mean, I wouldn't do this, but like if some, you know, evil person wanted to pay a bunch of kids $10 per envelope, how much money would they have to pay to flip an election result, like a council race, to collect enough of these, right? Now, there's a bit of a wrinkle where you have to get a hold of dates of birth, and we have to consult lawyers on how to like actually explore how easy or hard it is to systematically get, you know, large databases about Ontario voters and their dates of birth. This information is given away for free in many US states. They're like voters lists with your date of birth are just posted online. You just download them and see that. So it's great because it kind of gives population level data on sort of the rough distribution of dates of birth. So we sometimes use the Ohio registry to kind of simulate Ontario. They both start with O and they both have roughly the same population. So it seems fine. But I think this is the important point here. Every discarded letter is a potential fraudulent ballot. And again, it's like, I don't think that they've really thought about this, right? So like we said in the paper, like, look, you should have some kind of way to track what people do with this. And if you discover that most people throw them out insecurely, then you got to ask what happens to these letters. And if you don't know, why are you doing online voting? Like you got to work this out. These are all challenges. It's all like if if it was discovered that people were using this to flip council races, I mean, what a scandal that would be. Now, I don't know if anyone's dumb enough to do that, but, well, I mean, we've definitely thought about like going to IRB and saying, well, what if we, got a bunch of coveralls and like started going around, town, like going to people's blue boxes, like looking for cans and then maybe finding some VILs and then actually quantifying. Like, because it'd be really nice, like from an academic perspective, to actually quantify how available these are in garbage cans. I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure I want to actually explore that like in reality, but this is a real problem. Okay, so then we had a vulnerability where there was server-side misconfiguration in something called the server headers. They weren't using HSTS preloading, and they weren't denying framing of third-party websites. So we demonstrated how you could hijack a voting session and then place malicious overlays to flip the labels of the candidates to induce the voter into voting for the wrong person. But the beauty of this attack was that we didn't have to hack the underlying website's logic, and the IP address of the voter was preserved. So from the vendor's perspective, nothing happened, right? A lot of these attacks, this is research now, we're not actually doing this. A lot of these attacks, they have to like infect the voter's endpoint or like kind of take their credential, and then it has to then it comes from some other IP address. And the vendors do monitor IP traffic. We don't know exactly what they do because they won't tell us, and we've had to fight with them about it, and we still don't know. It turns out that public elections run by private companies are kind of like genius in the sense that they're beyond the freedom of information laws, right? The city, if you've make a Information Privacy Commissioner of Ontario request for information from a city, they would say, well, we don't have these records in our possession. They're in the vendor's possession. So we haven't really figured out how to solve that one. It's a little tricky, but anyways, so this was a real vulnerability in a real live election in 2022. We notified the vendor. We did what's called a coordinated vulnerability disclosure. So in the computer science world, if you discover something wrong, you tell them about it, and then they say, oh, yes, thank you. And they fix it, or they work with you to fix it. That's like the kind of what I'm trying to say. That's like the prestigious outcome, right? Is when you get that acknowledgement. Because a lot of times the vendors, they won't even respond. So there's a bit of an a difficult relationship there with researchers, because like on one hand, we're all on Team Canada here, okay? We're all on Team Democracy, but it can be kind of contentious when we're coming to them saying, hey, we see these like vulnerabilities in live election systems. Come on, guys. But then, some of them we can work with, some of them there's some tension, but isn't life just like that? Okay, here was another one that was about the confirmation pages. So Jeremy, you might recognize this. This is the idea we first discussed with the city of Toronto. When you vote, at the end, you say, I'd like to submit my ballot. It says, just review your choices. This is who you selected, right? Well, it turns out that information is sent to your computer from the server. Now it's encrypted, like all the good people in this room that use, their phones all day long. It's all encrypted, so we're not breaking that encryption. That encryption is like beyond the scope of just maybe even the intelligence agencies to properly break. So the encryption is not the way, it's actually the strongest way. But we actually realized that the way they were structuring the web page, we could tell who you voted for by how many bytes of encrypted data came back. And it was actually like, it wasn't a slam dunk, because there's all kinds of, for any of the tech people, there was all kinds of dynamic elements in the DOM, and there was like compression going on that created some sort of like instability in the eventual size. But we were able to get them down to like really nice distributions, and then train a classifier to say with a high probability, this is who you voted for. Okay, so we didn't have to break the encryption at all to break ballot secrecy, which was like a whoopsie. we went to the vendor, we did a coordinated vulnerability disclosure. This was like right before the 2022 election. They acknowledged it, which was very gracious, and then we worked with them to fix it. So that was a success story, and that change got pushed out to like 1 million voters, and so. Nova Scotia, this was the one that I presented with my students last week at Financial Cryptography. And it was just simply that there was a whole bunch of CVEs on this one vendor server that was running the election for most of the cities of Nova Scotia, Halifax notwithstanding. Okay, so now it's not that having a CVE is like particularly academically, mind-blowing. It's that how does a live election in an entire province have all of these CVEs? How did the vendor not notice? How did the cities not notice? How did the third-party auditors who audit the process not notice? Did they not do a penetration test? Like, how is it that this was not caught? Because these vulnerabilities here, they do not by themselves add up to the election is wrong. They are simply weaknesses that could be exploited. In our paper, we kind of go through scenarios. But the important thing here is that all of those vulnerabilities were just, well, most of them, it was a matter of just update your software. Right? In one case, one of the CVs was from 2008. Okay, and it was on the server of an election that was running an election in 2024. So this is about process, right? How do you vet something like this? And why is it falling to academia to just happen to notice this? Like I said, I sent my graduate student to go and just like kind of look on election day, and then he's like, oh, there's all these CVEs, and we're like, what does it mean, right? Because it might not add up to anything. So we spent a while to try to do some analysis to kind of sort of say what it could mean. It was too late for the election, like they couldn't have fixed it in time, and so we just kind of kept it to ourselves until we had our write-up and had thought it through. And at that point, we're kind of slightly disorganized academics, so it took us a while to do that, and we were doing courses and classes and so forth. So these CVs had been on the server for a long time. We did our coordinated vulnerability disclosure, we got no response, but then 2-3 days later, a whole bunch of CVs just disappeared. They updated the software. So that's not a explicit acknowledgement, but I would say that's an implicit acknowledgement. So to this day, they have never responded. So that's a little bit of a window. A Canadian researcher, lets a Canadian election company know about some software vulnerabilities that are on their machine, and you don't even get a response. So I don't think that's a great state of affairs, but that's just a testament to some of the incentives and animosity necessarily. Okay. Now Nova Scotia, they did commission some like procedural reports, like an audit, not of the results, but an audit like of the procedures. So they found some good stuff, but they did not find the CVEs, especially this critical one. They did not seemingly do penetration testing, which if you're a company, you hire good guy hackers to hack your stuff and then write a report about it so you can fix it, right? That's called penetration test. They are not doing that. They're not doing vulnerability scanning, at least as far as we can tell. And then of course, this is common. You don't get source code. You don't get configuration. There's no demo website. So for this particular vendor, there's no way for me to look at anything except what's publicly available through the login page. Well, that doesn't really tell us a whole lot, but how do you get access into this, right? They don't have to provide it. And as we see, they don't want to provide it because we're just a bunch of troublemakers. I think I'm trying to help make elections not insecure, but that's what we're facing. Okay, so just trying to wrap it up. So 2018, we had those, these are just some quick incidents. 50 municipalities, about 50, they had election outages, they had to extend the voting hours. the company called Dominion Voting Systems, and yes, they're the same Dominion from, Fox News, fame. There was a whole, lawsuit there that was, like millions of dollars. But I mean, they're a Canadian company originally, and they do run online voting in Canada. But they go on Fox News and say paper ballots are the gold standard for security, so I don't know. And then sort of in the end, Dominion ended up, they said it was their third-party co-location provider that didn't set the right amount of bandwidth, but it's like, well, how did you not test that on before election night? Anyway, so the clerks of the cities that were affected were really upset about this. It was really like a trauma for them. So, don't have your server going down on election, please. And then in 2022, the follow-up, we had an issue where like the ballot was like the misconfiguration in the online system. So they had to pause it mid-election. That vulnerability I was telling you about, site will patch that, during the election. And of course, when we disclose this, we kind of keep our mouths shut until some, months later after the election's over, after the election contest period, because, we don't want to put them into any kind of legal jeopardy. That's not what we're after here. We're after just trying to improve the process. And then in 2022, Dominion had an election night outage again, for a different reason though, because they were interfacing with their e-poll book provider, and they didn't fail gracefully when the e-poll book provider failed, so people couldn't vote. So that was not quite as traumatic, but still bro, what do you know? In terms of standards and laws, these are just, some kinds of, this is just like the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of things that I would like to see. My students and I did a standards-based review. Before we had the national standard, all we had was the Council of Europe guidelines, like what should an internet voting system look like. So we used that standard to actually go into a review of all of what's going on in Ontario. We found just broad non-compliance with the general good ideas of internet voting, if that is such a thing. But here's some things, and it usually comes down to, even if they do these, you'll never see it, right? And it's you might be able to get it through freedom of information, but they really don't like it when you do a freedom of information. I once had to get into an appeal with the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario because I did a freedom of information request asking the city had contracted optical scan tabulators. And I wanted to know who owned the tabulators. I said, dude, redact everything else, take out all in. I don't want to know money, dollars. I don't want to know anything. Who owns the tabulators? That took me 6 months to get an answer. So even if you could get it, that they'll wait until the last day. They'll wait till 5 p.m. of the last day possible. And then they'll walk your response over to a Canada Post mailbox and drop it in to make sure it takes another week to get to them. So, but if you've ever done a freedom of information request, especially for the federal government, you know how it goes. Okay, so online voting, I'm running out of time, so I'll just skip this, but the classic trope is, well, I can vote online, why can't I bank online? I can bank naked, why can't I vote naked? But the real difference here is ballot secrecy. Okay, if you want to get rid of ballot secrecy, we can do online voting today. Okay, but we have the same. So that's what makes it challenging as a technical problem. How do you prove that everything was done right without having a sort of public representation of what everyone does, right? The bank knows where you get all your money from, and knows where it goes, what time, who it came from. You have this common record. If you're not getting paid, you call up the bank, hey, I'm missing money. If they don't, if they do a mistake, you can see that. There's a joint sense of what's right. In online voting or just voting in general, you do not, the government is not supposed to know how you voted. So that works in a paper ballot. Put the ballot in the box, everyone watches the box, we kind of shake the box, pour it out, then that works, right? Do it in an online voting setting. Now you have to prove the election was right digitally without revealing everyone's individual votes. That's a hard problem. It's one of the hardest problems in all of cybersecurity, and it's been like that for 40 years. Okay, There is a model to deal with this. It's a lot of work that Jeremy and I do in research using cryptography to prove things about the election. End-to-end verifiability. So if you want to do online voting, this is the only model that I know that could actually prove things about the conduct of the election without revealing everyone's vote. But it uses advanced exotic cryptography, and a lot of people don't like that. And I'm just like, well, I don't know what to tell you. You can have your online voting and not have any kind of verifiability, or you can have it and then have to work with some, academics. Switzerland is doing this, by the way. Like I'm an expert, examiner for some of what they're doing. It's, I cannot imagine talking to the PMO about prime number generation, but I do that with the Swiss chancellery. It's really interesting. So it's possible, but I think Canada's just not gonna, quite get there. I'm gonna skip this. We talked briefly about Elections Quebec, and they got rid of the project. They said none of the vendors were able to meet their security standards, so they put the pilot on hold. This is about the standards. I'm gonna skip that as well, just because we're out of time. But, what can we do? There's a lot of things we ought to be doing, but, here's a few. We have the standard now, but there's no certification testing program. So vendors are going around in Ontario saying, oh, yes, we comply with the standard, but there's no independent review of that. So that's problematic. It'd be great to fix that. Security audits, it'd be really nice if we could look at their stuff too. But we're, generally kind of seen as like hostile to them, which again, I don't think we are not the bad guys, I promise. End-to-end verifiability, that would be really great, but I think we're maybe a century away from that. I mean, it's gonna take a lot of growing up of society to kind of get to the point where we're doing that. Hopefully, we're still doing elections in 100 years. I think we can do it, but there's a lot of pressure there. The provincial oversight, like what Quebec has, a little bit more involvement. Ontario doesn't have that. It'd be great if they got their head in the game. This absent landlord business is, Dougie, if you're listening, not working out for us, okay? Paper ballot fallback. I mean, it would be nice to not go to pure online voting. Certainly Council of Europe is very adamant that you shouldn't just be going all in on online voting in one shot. These are some of the papers that I cited earlier. This is just some of the work that we've done. You can see it's just like drip, 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 drip. I got more on the way. It's just, there's so much to write about here. We're also in the news all the time. Here's just a couple of, the purpose here is just to show you the raw number of, things, but I want to leave with this quote. This is one article, and this was the quote. This is from me. If you're going to have an election, you need to have evidence that it was counted correctly. And then another article from, this was a couple days before, because they asked, it was the mayor of St. Thomas, Ontario. They said, well, what about this, this guy from Western is saying, you need to have evidence, whatever. And his response was, well, the people that run the systems tell us that we have no worries. And so, I mean, just, if you want to know what's got me all worked up in this space, this is a good quote to sort of exemplify it, right? This is about trust, but not trust as in I trust you, it's like trust, I have to trust you. So, okay, so just to conclude, the problem with online voting is not that it can't be done. I promise you, it's already happening. Millions of Canadians have used it already. This is not the problem. The problem, and I'm going to end with a quote from Jurassic Park. I expect many of you know it. The power we're using here is what the problem is. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. The knowledge was not earned, and therefore there's no responsibility that's being taken for, in this case, cyber risk, the extreme cyber risks. It was a matter of accomplishing something as fast as it can be done, and before you even know it, you're selling it, right? So, and that's a reference to the corporate public sort of interaction that, if you're building a bridge, you need it. Maybe it works in online voting, but there's a lot more there. I could talk about this all day, but thank you very much for listening. I'll land it.
All right, we'll turn it over to question and answer. Oh, yeah, so I saw your hand first, sorry.
Finally, Trump was right, because I was keeping, when you spoke about the fact that in some, they send a code to people by mail.
Mhm.
Okay, this is why I said Trump was right, because he always said that mail voting.
Oh, yeah.
Vulnerable, and I'd never thought about that, but it is.
Yeah.
Very, very
Well-
important vulnerability. My question was, are people thinking about a way to send the information to the voter without using mail? And I was thinking about the fact that I think it's in Norway where everybody or almost has a specific governmental
Identity.
email,
Email. Oh, interesting, yeah.
you know, a digital identity.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about is when you spoke about online, like the comparison between online banking and the vote. I kept thinking, I don't know if you have the same in Ontario, but in Quebec, when you want to go on some governmental services, you can identify yourself going through your bank.
To the bank, yeah, CRA does that, the single
So-
sign on, yeah.
Which would be one way of, you know,
Yeah.
taking into account all the other.
Political science.
I think about this one.
They would, I think the political scientists would have to figure out whether having a bank account to sign into your vote is like gonna cause a problem. But I mean, like they do it, CRA does it, so I mean, if it's good enough to pay your taxes. Yeah, interesting. By the way, if you pay your taxes and CRA doesn't like what they see, they make you show their homework, right? So everyone in this room is required. It's not that they don't trust you, it's just that if you make a claim, you have to be ready to support it, right? So it seems only fair that the agency running the election would be held to the similar standard of a average taxpayer. By showing your work. I don't care if your calculator was certified, I care that your math was right, show me your numbers. Now to your question about mail-in voting, of course, mail-in voting is got problems. It's about unsupervised voting, you know. People are around the table kind of directing you how to vote and you don't really know, and there's these drop-off boxes and there's a whole big issue there with chain of custody. But internet voting inherits all of those problems and then adds more. So it's kind of like a more dangerous form than, so take whatever you think about mail-in voting and then make it more risky, and then that's internet voting, right? Because at least in the Ontario version, you have all of the risk of postal voting. Canada Post goes on strike. I was in Yellowknife after the fires and they were telling harrowing stories, the chief electoral officer, about choppers having to fly over to islands to get the ballot boxes out and so they were making quite the case for internet voting, but you still have to mail things to people, and that's worse. And then you had a third point, I'm sorry, okay. All right, but I think there's some other questions, so.
Hi, I'm from London, Ontario.
No way.
Unfortunately, yeah, I would love to know where in middle of nowhere, Ontario, the two of you are from. But I just mainly a point of clarification. Super simple, just to make sure I understand properly, but they fully just only give the municipalities the total count, like who won. They don't even get a count, they don't even get a percentage.
No, they get the
Okay.
number, they get the count, right?
Okay.
They get the like statement of the vote.
Okay,
Okay, so the statement of the vote's like there, but it's just like, think of it from just as a mental exercise.
Yeah.
Imagine that you're talking to ChatGPT and you're asking ChatGPT, who won, what are the numbers of the vote or whatever, and ChatGPT tells you something. And you're like, seems legit, but
There's
is it hallucinating? Like, how would you know?
like there's no they don't get like an Excel or anything that gives
No,
raw counts.
I mean, I can show you about ChatGPT can give you an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Right? So I wanna make this clear. The statements of the vote are provided, okay,
They're
so
not
those.
verified.
Yeah, so you were given numbers. This poll that had 521 voters was split along these lines. This poll or whatever, and then you aggregate them all together, you were given the fine grained results. But at the end of the day, think about the following. I give you two statements of the vote. One of them's right, and one of them is like maliciously modified in some way. And now I ask you, which one's the right one? And if you can answer, you win, and if you can't answer, then you lose, and then you play that game. And imagine we play this game over and over again, and so what does that look like? And do you have a reliable way to spot the difference between? So that I'm applying a very classic cryptography game theory to this. How can you tell the difference between a right vote and a wrong vote? You need to have some kind of information in addition to the statement of the vote. When you have a physical paper ballot box, you have this thing called object permanence of the physical reality. You put paper in, and unless you believe in like aliens or, you know, whatever psychic, like astral projection, whatever, the ballots that go in the morning are still in there, especially if you've been there all day drinking your green tea, they don't disappear. Okay, in the digital world, I mean, this is like, why do you think piracy like was the thing? It's like we can create copies of it, like it's mutable. This is why blockchain people want to try to put everything into a blockchain, but generally they have to change voting to do it. So that's its own problem. But at the end of the day, you need to have some kind of evidence. One way to do that, though, we know how, is to use cryptography. These are proofs using mathematics. Cryptography has the advantage of we can keep things secret while still proven. I can prove to you I know where Waldo is in a way that would convince you without actually revealing. I can prove to you I know the solution to a Sudoku in a way that would convince you, but wouldn't reveal it to you. So we can use these methods, these mathematical methods. Jared and I both did our PhDs in these. It's a rich body of work. It's just about getting the psychological and social acceptability to start doing this for real. We did do some trial elections in the US during our graduate days. Like I say, Swiss Post is and the Chancellery in Switzerland are working towards this, but there's a lot of barriers there. A lot of barriers to like education. How do you convince a clerk how to use cryptography to like, and no one in the public is going to them and saying, I don't know about that election. I don't trust it. Maybe if I had some way, you know, they're not asking this question. So for now, we see this, it's all risk, but no actual incident. Well, that's actually, well, there's some incidents, but for the most part, like, I think we're in a scenario where we might have to wait around for there to be like a major incident. And I think the general consensus in the clerk community is like, they're all nervous about it too. And they don't want some major incident destroying online voting for the entire country, but they also recognize that that's a possibility. You know, the province isn't making them stop and the voters aren't making them stop. And it's really convenient to use. So, you know, it's gonna keep going until something happens, unfortunately. I'd like it to not be that way, but you know, we're trying to make it as good as we can through some of our works.
Okay, we'll go to the pack, then we're going online, and then I'll try and keep up, but if you can answer a little shorter.
Okay, I'm sorry, you know, it's a professor's habit. Yeah.
I'll be in touch with that.
Oh, maybe not. I mean, we have 20 minutes. Yeah, I think.
Okay, because you are like, as if you are about to take off.
Yes, no.
I want that bag.
Yeah, I know.
You're waiting to give it to me.
Are there examples of successful audit processes in sensitive industries that you would trust in this context, or is this just a fundamentally impossible endeavor given the structure of the problem? And then second, how difficult or expensive are these CVEs to exploit? Because my sense is that in many elections, like the incentives to hack are pretty low, actually. So you need someone willing to take the risk and pay the cost. So how hard is it to hack?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like who's gonna hack the election, if you talk to the clerks, they'll often say, no one's gonna hack our election. And you know, the CSE even says so. And then you talk to the CSE and they're like, no, that's not what we're saying. And I'm like, so what are you saying? They're like, well, we can't tell you. It's like intelligent. So I don't have a strong window into what actually would happen. But I would say, especially with municipal elections, everyone's like, well, who's gonna hack a municipal election? But if you talk to people, that are candidates in municipal elections and they see all the stuff. I mean, it's like, there's some interesting things that happen there. Just consider that, there's millions of dollars of land deals that are at stake. You are taxed by a municipality. You are subject to laws of the municipality. It actually has more effect on your day-to-day life at the municipal level than, federally, right? Some war going on somewhere on one hand versus like the person next door to you that is like running a bandsaw all night long or something like that. So municipal politics is very contested, but it varies by city. So if there was ever going to be some kind of fraud, it would be very unique to that context if it was a local doing it. But then the nation states that are operating in all of the other cyber domains, I think we know that like foreign interference in elections is like the federal government talks about it. And if you watch Question Period, it's there's like the task force and all this sort of stuff. So federal election, foreign interference in federal elections is something that is like understood to exist. So to say that it couldn't happen or it's unlikely to happen in municipalities, right? I think the cities need to kind of get a grip on that and recognize that there's all kinds of different motivations. I mean, the cities are always getting hit by ransomware, for goodness sakes, right? So, I mean, can you imagine like I'm gonna ransom your election results? Like, I won't let you declare the results until you pay me 3 Bitcoin. Like, I mean, that just thought of that. That'd be great. No, don't do that. That's illegal. Like, but yeah. So there. Yeah. So the hack. Okay. Sorry, I'm keeping it.
No. Okay. We'll go to Benjamin online if you want to. Hopefully this works.
Yep. Hi, online. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Hello.
Great. No, thanks for like very, very interesting talk. I will try to keep my question brief, which I'm very bad at. But I guess the question is, to what extent is this a problem? Are these problems with municipal elections? Are these problems with sort of, state or governmental elections? Or are you identifying a more general problem with online voting? Because the most common, the online voting I'm familiar with are with things like faculty elections and shareholder elections, right? I mean, it seems like I've been voting by proxy for my, retirement account investments for 20 years, maybe 15 years. So, do the same problems arise in sort of non-governmental elections, or have they? Is it just not a problem, or do they have good solutions?
Yeah. So it does exist in other elections to some extent, but you have to understand that governmental, like civic, like democratic elections have a lot of requirements on them around ballot secrecy and transparency, that if you're doing a faculty election, it's not as contested. It's not as much of a trust proposition. So, okay, so I'll give you an example, right? So, well, so Simply Voting, they're here in Montreal. We've worked with them. We were talking about the ballot length vulnerability was simply, they're reasonable people. They run a lot of university elections, right? So when I vote for my university senator, I use their product. They also run online elections, right, in municipalities. And the CEO of Simply Voting has said, I don't think that our product is appropriate for federal elections. But then I would point out that the current Prime Minister of Canada was brought onto the ballot by a Simply Voting election. So, because the Liberal Party of Canada used it to elect. So there's different tiers of elections, different stakes. But I think that, so you could say, well, maybe party voting is not as important, but it does feed directly into democratic elections. But I think that it doesn't matter what we think about democratic elections, the laws and the principles are very much centered around there has to be transparency and verifiability. If you're voting for board member seats on some company or whatever, I don't know if there's that same expectation or requirement, but for democratic elections, there is. It's entrenched, it's there, and we have to sort of live up to it. The University of Western Ontario has their own law in Ontario law that allows them to write their own sort of bylaws, essentially, kind of like the cities. So they could just arbitrarily, I suppose, write their own legislation and say that you don't need it to be transparent. But At the municipal level, there are principles of Municipal Elections Act of Ontario that say there is to be certainty that the votes cast reflect the votes counted. So how are you going to provide that certainty? And the trick is you're not allowed to say, because I said so, or because the vendor said so. Right, so how do you provide something else, right? That's where the real trick is. But different types of elections, but democratic elections, we don't even have to have the debate. We know it's in the laws and the principles of the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have 3 questions. Is that allowed?
Yes. I'll answer questions all day. I love talking about voting.
Yeah,
It's just everyone else is, it's like Friday night, so.
I try to make it short. So first, the methods of detections, you said you are focusing on cryptography and that's a computer science base. Now, I want to twist it a little bit to the political science side, whether political science methods could also be used. So something like a natural experiment, for example, where you have people in the same neighborhood, but some are exposed to the online and some are exposed to the paper ballot, or some other form of a direct comparison where you can also match the voters and compare the vote. Have you used any methods like that? So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is about whether you have found in Canada any politicians or parties that are more open to discussing the regulations. So because you say in countries like Switzerland and other countries, we do have more regulations, we do have better audits, and we do have a better test of these voting machines before they go into effect. So, why can't this be done in Canada? And is there like a resistance on the side of the politicians, or is there some openness that you have seen? And I would be interested in that openness. And my last question is about the America Safe Act. The push, as somebody already said, towards the paper ballot, back to the paper ballot. Is that a step that you are generally welcoming given your research findings?
Okay, so I'll go backwards. Do I favor return to paper ballots? CBC always tries to catch me in this one. So I would say I favor an election that provides evidence that meets the democratic principles. And at the end of the day, that is, as an engineer, that is the correct view. We inherit requirements from our ancestors. We inherit those requirements, and we fought for those requirements, those democratic requirements of elections through the very bloody 20th century and before. So, give me that. And how you do it, that's fine. You find a way to do it, but if you can give me those properties, I'm happy. So if there's a way to do it with online voting, then great, we can finally #vote naked, right? But the key here is that it has to uphold the principles of transparency and independence of scrutiny. If you cannot deliver those things in an online form, but we do have a baseline version of it in paper ballot form, then yeah, you might have to go back to paper ballots until you figure it out. Because the alternative is to keep running elections without verifiability and then just hoping that everything's fine. Probably is, but you can have an election that is untrusted, even if it is trustworthy, right? That's, the matrix. So that's something to think about. And then I always, these politicians that can always remember 3 questions, I don't understand how they do. What was your?
So which party, which politician?
Okay, which party? Okay, so
Discussing it.
So contrary to what Cambridge thinks, I am not an activist, I'm an academic. I don't know how to lobby governments. That's not my role. My role is to say, hey, you got 20 CVEs on your server, you really should update that, right? My role is to maybe help inform how, we didn't want to write those standards. We didn't feel it was our job to do it. But we wrote op-ed after op-ed. We tried to kind of get some engagement on that so somebody would take it on. It never happened. So we had to do it ourselves. But in terms of how to solve this politically, I don't know. I've talked to people in the federal government, people at conferences and so forth. And the consensus seems to be that we're kind of in a bind because the federal government only cares about the federal government, right? From a voting perspective. The provincial government only cares about the provincial government, arguably the municipal government. In Quebec, the province looks at the cities, Ontario, not so much. And then cities only care about their own selves, right? They're rather, it's their mandate. They're not trying to solve the problem across the board, right? So getting some kind of political consensus how to do it is not an issue. My understanding is that one of the reasons why Ontario hasn't been involved in this is because it hasn't been a political issue, right? It isn't tracking, you know, in the like, you know, Sun News or whatever. And there could be ways to instigate that to become a political issue, to become a national topic of conversation, but those aren't things for me to instigate. What I can tell you is that my vision for the, you know, remainder of my career would be to have a federal agency that was capable of being a sort of a, you know, the technology grown up in the room to advise about what types of voting systems are correct, actually like a sort of like a national certification agency for election technology. They have something like that in the US. It's not perfect, but they have anything at all. We don't have anything. It would not be to tell the provinces what to do, like the US. It would be simply a federal agency that has enough concentration of knowledge that could work with the provinces, and the provinces would, over the years, choose to implement their own versions of whatever the federal agency decided. So that's a model that's similar to the US, but you know, there would have to be care done to keep the vendor involvement a little bit at it. And then the first question,
I even forget.
yeah.
It was a good one.
Whether we can use national experiments or political science
Oh, yeah.
methods to detect.
So you couldn't do it in a live election. There'd be probably all kinds of, like, IRB would probably, you know, if you didn't get arrested, IRB certainly would deny it. So how do you do it outside of a real election? You can do mock elections and so forth, but I'm not sure what you would be measuring. Now, one of the things I am worried about is that if the vendor knows how you voted, okay, and so what the vendors already do is they provide detailed information to clerks about demographics, right? Because they know, like, from the list, who votes, when they vote, what mode of voting they used, broken down by demographic, like age, you know, gender, all this kind of stuff. And so what I'm worried about is the scenario where, well, if they know how you voted, imagine they give you all of that breakdown, but of who you actually voted for. You know, 23% of males aged 20 to 29 voted for this person, right? So it's not polling data, it's actual ground truth data, right? So they have access to that. So my question is, from a legal perspective, would that be illegal? Right? It'd be illegal to say it for an individual voter, but if you were selling it as aggregated actual voting intention data, would that break ballot secrecy laws? I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer, but that's the kind of stuff I'm kind of thinking about. So certainly they might be able to run those kind of experiments. They would have a window into some of the demographics that we wouldn't. But the ethics of it is like, I don't know. But I can tell you, we as academics are like, first of all, we stay far away from the actual elections. I want to make that clear. We don't touch the actual elections. Okay, we are interested in the process, in the technology, and like what the vulnerabilities are, but we don't touch the real election.
Okay, yeah.
Just, well, you know, keep it nice and clean for everybody, so.
Yeah.
But is there an example where there's, say, two polling places, demographics are very similar, they're both set to use election technology, there's a power outage or something like that, so the one jurisdiction falls back to paper, the other goes ahead with election
That's kind of.
technology, so that's sort of like an accidental natural experiment.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then is there
okay, so,
differences?
my colleague, Nicole Goodman, wrote a paper about that exact problem in 2022. The paper is called "The Effect of Exogenous Shocks on Polling Place," and it was about the Dominion outage and how that affected the different places. So, and she was able, I'm not a social scientist, so I don't really understand exactly what she did, but there was a nice like correlative effect there that she was able to demonstrate, and so I can, you know, I put you in touch with her.
Okay, thanks.
So.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm impressed and concerned with the number of issues, of potential issues that you have raised in your presentation. Something many social scientists are concerned about is the equality or inequality between citizens. I wonder, to what extent are there evidences or reasons to believe that some groups of citizens may be more vulnerable with these kind of issues. For instance, are less affluent people more likely to use internet subscription, which are related to higher risks? Are people with lower digital literacy more vulnerable? Are people who belong to more geographically remote communities more likely to be connected with more risky communication infrastructures
Relative to voting or just in general?
relative to the safety of internet voting?
Yeah, so I know that Nicole Goodman does a lot of work of this kind. This is a little bit outside my scope, but one of the big issues in the internet voting meets social science world is how does introducing internet voting affect turnout? Does it boost participation among certain demographics? And the big demographic they're always trying to get out is the youth voters. And so it tends to be the case that you can generally show a bump in turnout after the initial adoption. And then it just depends on context after that, but a lot of times you'll see a drop off. So what we've been told in our travels through the voting world is that the thing that drives turnout is political engagement, not the technology. And then in terms of access, that would be an interesting study. I don't know if anyone's done a study on that, but like who uses what mode of voting. In the case of Ontario cities that ban all other types of forms of voting, you have to vote online. But then they make these like drive-through, you know, at the mall, at the library. You can go and use the like grubby library computer to cast your vote. I'm not recommending it, but this is what they do to make that sort of accessible to the widest range of people possible. So, and then a lot of them offer telephone voting, which they feel like, you know, is supposed to help the seniors with the digital divide, because not everyone has a computer. They also have like people that go into senior care facilities to help the seniors vote. And so sometimes that gets into trouble because it's like the candidates themselves like going in and just say, okay, now just, you know, it's like Patrick Swayze and Ghost guiding your hand to the, like, click the button, you know, so that's not great, but yeah, so the digital divide between like digital natives and then like the people that didn't grow up with internet, I mean, these are all questions, but I'm not the person asked, but I know who can give you those answers. So anyone that wants to hear more about that, I can put you in connection with my colleague, Dr. Goodman. Yeah.
I have two questions. Thanks for the feedback. The first is like there's potentially other ways of like auditing outcomes, right? Like there's all kinds of face verification technologies or fingerprinting technologies, or like the pathway forward is actually much more.
Fingerprinting or facial verification is for establishing identity for.
Yeah.
But once you click your ballot, like you're logged into the system, okay, let's say you have the best liveness detection, it's all like whatever, they have this for parliamentary voting during COVID, right? But then you click the button that says, thank you for voting. Well, then
why can't you just print out or take a picture of your own vote on your machine? You could audit it yourself.
How? Like, what do you mean? Like you say, you take a screenshot, says,
Well, I mean,
You cannot test it.
but you could then send it, like, it could automatically trigger something that sends that to a. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying, like, isn't there much more of a, like, aren't you thinking in a very limited, like, you're I'm just like, maybe giving you a hard time, you're like saying that the solution is cryptography, but like.
well, I would put it to you.
Yeah, I mean.
If you have a way to do it that doesn't involve cryptography, but that in turn provides meaningful assurances,
Yeah,
right? Nothing in the vein of trust me, bro, but like, oh yeah, that shit's real. Like, if you have something like, or if anybody has anything in that vein that doesn't involve cryptography, I'd love to hear about it. The reason why it's not that it needs cryptography because I'm a cryptographer and I want that. It's because you have to prove something while maintaining ballot secrecy about a digital blob of data.
right.
So that's where the cryptography comes out, because there's really not a good way to prove something while it's encrypted at the same time. I can prove that this adds up to this amount. These encrypted ballots, I don't know what's in them, but I can prove to you that they add up to, 23 votes for Alice.
I'm increasingly convinced it's bad,
So
I'm not sure.
but it comes down to this. I had this argument with my US colleagues, because a lot of them, like, they're like, oh, internet voting, end-to-end verification, it's not ready for prime time, it's not this, it's not that, whatever. And my point to them is like, okay, the Americans are adamant that there has to be digital technology in the vote count. You cannot be hand counting that business, that's what they all say, okay? Because it's just too much, they vote on too many things. Okay, so you have to have digital tech in the vote counting. But then you don't have digital tech in the vote verification, that seems unfair. Yes, if you have paper ballots, they have this, so if you're doing optical scan, we can verify some tabulator stuff with something called a risk limiting audit, where you take a random sample of the paper, but there you're assuming that like you have a paper trail. You cannot do risk limiting audits in the internet voting case because you do not have that original ground truth to then sample from, right? When you click a button and it goes somewhere, the ground truth is disconnected at that point. You don't know where it goes, you don't know what happens. I'm not saying anything happens, but how do you know your vote counted, right? And again, without saying trust me, bro. That's the very problem.
Okay, we have a reception after, so if there's more questions, you can ask Alex. This is a gift,
Oh.
and well, they would